For thousands of years, the story of Troy has been defined by a single stolen queen, Helen of Sparta, carried off behind massive stone walls, provoking a 10-year siege that soaked the Aegean in blood. The climax is just as famous, a seemingly impenetrable fortress, finally brought down by a massive wooden horse hiding Greek soldiers inside. It's a story packed with angry gods and perfect heroes. Because of these supernatural elements, many researchers long assumed the entire conflict was purely fictional, a piece of poetry disconnected from real events. That assumption held until archaeologists started examining the elevated shorelines of modern-day Turkey. Digging into a hill called Hisarlik, they unearthed the physical stone foundations of a massive, heavily fortified ancient city. It was sitting exactly where the old stories claimed Troy should be. Finding the city forces a serious question. If Troy itself was real, what about the war that supposedly destroyed it? Stripping away the poetry reveals a much colder historical reality. To see what actually happened, we have to look past the romance of a kidnapped queen and examine the geopolitical realities of the Bronze Age. Troy was perched on the Hellespont, the only maritime passage connecting the Aegean to the Black Sea. Troy sat at a choke point, giving it leverage over the flow of grain, wealth, and vital metal alloys required to forge bronze. The Mycenaean Greek offensive was a calculated deployment meant to seize the ancient world's most lucrative trade route. When we think of ancient Greece, we often picture philosophers in white robes, but the Mycenaeans of the late Bronze Age were a society of aggressive warlords. They operated out of strongholds engineered with massive stone blocks, built to project military dominance across the region. Their military edge came from advanced metallurgy. They mass-produced bronze weaponry, outfitting professional soldiers for close-quarters combat. They also deployed horse-drawn chariots, giving their commanders a mobile strike capability that could quickly overrun disorganized infantry. In the ruins of Troy, archaeologists found a distinct layer of ash, smashed pottery, and arrowheads. This destruction layer dates between 1250 and 1220 BCE, aligning with the traditional timeline of the myth. The Mycenaean Greeks possessed a clear economic motive to take the city and the hardware to do it, and the archaeological record confirms they had the opportunity to burn Troy to the ground. Evidence of a destruction layer confirms Troy fell, but it leaves open the question of how the Greeks breached walls engineered to withstand a decade of siege. One historical theory argues that the horse was ancient military terminology. The Greeks likely built a wooden siege engine, like a battering ram, to physically break down the city's gates. Another theory looks at the Greek pantheon. Poseidon was known as the god of horses, but he was also the god of earthquakes. A seismic tremor could have shattered Troy's defenses right as the Greeks were laying siege. In either scenario, the wooden horse was likely a metaphor for the physical destruction of the city's defenses, an image taken literally by the poets who inherited the story. There is a historical irony to this victory. Shortly after conquering Troy, the Greek civilization was wiped out. Around 1200 BCE, a systemic collapse driven by droughts and the invasion of the Sea Peoples caused the mass abandonment of cities. The palace economies failed entirely, resulting in the loss of written language. The Greek world plunged into a centuries-long dark age. With their cities burned and their writing gone, survivors were left with nothing but their voices to remember their history. The memory of this final Bronze Age conflict survived strictly through oral tradition, passed down by generations of survivors. Centuries later, these histories were finally written down. Poets like Homer locked the memory of Troy into the cultural record. But this ancient historiography blended factual accounts with mythology and political agendas to give meaning to their past. It would take later figures like Herodotus to look back at these epics, cross-referencing folklore with physical geography to find the origins of the conflict. The history of Troy is a case study in human ambition and the realities of economic warfare. A strategic strike on a trade route was preserved and polished for centuries, turning a brutal Bronze Age conquest into a shared cultural memory.